The scent of lavender and old books filled Linda Peterson's small, tidy home. At 70, she had curated a life of quiet contentment. Her days were a gentle rhythm of gardening, book club meetings, and, most importantly, doting on her only grandson, Leo. Photos of the bright-eyed 6-year-old adorned every surface, a gallery of toothy grins and scraped knees. Her late husband, Robert, would have adored him. Sometimes, when the house was silent, she'd trace the frame of their wedding photo and tell him all about Leo's latest adventure. Her world was small, but it was safe, and it was hers. That safety shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. The doorbell rang, and when Linda opened it, the strained faces of her daughter Susan and son-in-law Mark were the first sign that the earth was about to tilt on its axis. They stepped inside, their movements stiff, refusing her offer of iced tea with tight, forced smiles. They sat on the floral sofa that had been in the family for 30 years, a piece of furniture that had witnessed decades of joys and sorrows. Today, it was about to bear the weight of the worst sorrow of all. "Mom," Susan began, her voice trembling as she reached for Mark's hand, We have some news about Leo." Linda's heart seized. She sank into her armchair, her knuckles white as she gripped the fabric. "What is it? Is he all right?" Mark cleared his throat, taking over as Susan dissolved into quiet, racking sobs. "He's been unwell, tired all the time. We took him to a specialist at the university hospital." He paused, and the silence in the room became a roaring void. "He's been diagnosed with a rare form of juvenile myelofibrosis. It's a disease of the bone marrow." The clinical, terrifying words hung in the air. Linda felt the blood drain from her face. She could only stare, her mind struggling to process the information. Little Leo, her vibrant, laughing Leo, was sick, seriously sick. Susan finally looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "The doctors say his case is aggressive. Standard treatments aren't effective enough. His only real hope is a series of experimental therapies, but, Mom, they're astronomical. The insurance company classifies them as elective and won't cover a single cent." Mark produced a brochure from his jacket pocket, its glossy paper covered in complex medical diagrams and heartbreaking statistics. "Each round of treatment is over $100,000, and he might need several. We've exhausted our savings just getting the diagnosis. We don't know what to do." Linda's world, once so stable and calm, was crumbling around her. The lavender and old books faded into the background, replaced by the stark, cold fear of a grandmother watching her legacy, her only link to the future, being threatened. All she could see was Leo's face, his innocent smile. All she could feel was a desperate, primal urge to save him, no matter the cost. A few days later, after a sleepless period of weeping and praying, Linda invited Susan and Mark back to her home. She needed a plan, a way to fight back against the faceless disease that was threatening her grandson. She was met with a new, carefully crafted presentation of hope. "We've been up all night, Mom," Susan said, her voice imbued with a new, determined energy. She spread a set of professionally printed documents on the coffee table. At the top of the main page, in a soft, hopeful blue font, were the words, "Leo's Light." "We started a foundation," Mark explained, pointing to the paperwork. "It's the only way. We can solicit donations, run fundraisers, apply for grants. It's a way to centralize the effort, to give Leo a fighting chance." Linda looked at the logo, a simple drawing of a boy reaching for a star. Her heart ached with a mixture of grief and pride. Her daughter, in the face of such horror, was being proactive and strong. It was a testament to her love for her child. "This is a wonderful idea," Linda whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Susan's face was a mask of weary gratitude. "But it's a long road. We have to start now." His face was a mask. "The first treatment needs to be paid for in advance, and we're so far from the goal." Linda looked around her quiet living room, at the comfortable furniture, the photos, the mementos of a life lived prudently. She and Robert had never been wealthy, but they had been careful. They had saved, invested wisely, and built a nest egg meant to see her through her own old age in comfort and security. It was her safety net, the physical embodiment of Robert's promise to always take care of her. In that moment, the choice was agonizingly clear. What was her own comfort compared to her grandson's life? Robert would have understood. He would have done the exact same thing. With a resolve that settled deep in her bones, she stood up. "I'll go to the bank tomorrow," she announced. The next day, she sat across from a young bank manager who looked at her with thinly veiled concern as she requested the liquidation of her entire retirement portfolio. "Mrs. Peterson," he said gently, "this is a very significant sum. Are you absolutely certain? This fund is your primary source of income." Linda met his gaze without flinching. "My grandson is sick. This is for his medical care." She would not be deterred. An hour later, the transaction was complete. She walked over to Susan and Mark's house and handed them a cashier's check for $85,000. Susan burst into tears, clutching the check to her chest. "Oh, Mom, we don't deserve this. How can we ever repay you?" "Don't you worry about that," Linda said, pulling her daughter into a fierce hug. "We're family. Just save my boy." As she walked away, a strange lightness filled her. She had sacrificed her security, but she had bought what felt like the most precious thing in the world: hope. Armed with a purpose, Linda Peterson became the unofficial and most effective ambassador for Leo's light. Her own monumental contribution wasn't enough. She was determined to move heaven and earth for her grandson. Her first stop was her church, a close-knit community that had been her rock since Robert's passing. During the fellowship hour after Sunday service, she stood before them, her voice trembling but clear, and shared Leo's story. She spoke of his vibrant spirit, the terrible diagnosis, and the crushing financial burden. She held up a Leo's Light brochure, her hands shaking slightly. "My daughter and her husband are fighting with everything they have," she concluded, tears welling in her eyes. "But they can't do it alone. Any help, any prayer would be a blessing." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Pastor Dave announced a special collection would be taken up the following Sunday. Margaret, who ran the church bake sales, immediately organized an event with all proceeds going to the foundation. People Linda had known for decades pressed cash and checks into her hands, murmuring words of comfort and support. Her mission didn't stop there. At her weekly book club, she set aside the discussion of their latest novel to make a heartfelt appeal. The women, her friends of 20 years, listened with solemn faces. By the end of the meeting, they had pooled together over $2,000. Linda went door to door in her quiet suburban neighborhood, a place where everyone knew her as the kind woman with the beautiful rose bushes. She explained the situation to her neighbors, who responded with open hearts and open wallets. The donations poured in, small and large, each one a testament to the community's compassion. Susan and Mark were ecstatic. They called Linda every few days with breathless updates. "Mom, you're incredible! Another 10,000 came in this week," Susan would exclaim. "We've scheduled his first round of treatment. It's all because of you." Linda felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The fear hadn't vanished, but it was now matched by a powerful feeling of proactive love. She was a warrior in this fight, rallying the troops, leading the charge against the disease. She saw the total on the foundation's website tick upward: $100,000, then $150,000, and soon it was approaching a staggering $200,000. Each new number was a victory, a tangible piece of hope she had helped build. She was saving her grandson, and an entire community was standing right there beside her. She felt exhausted, but her heart was full. She was their hero, Susan had said, and for Leo, she would be anything. As the weeks bled into months, the initial flurry of fundraising settled into a new, strange reality. Linda, still deeply entrenched in her role as chief advocate for Leo's Light, began to notice small, dissonant notes in the symphony of her family's supposed crisis. The first was the car. One afternoon, she drove past Susan and Mark's house and saw a brand-new, gleaming black luxury SUV in the driveway, the kind with a price tag that Linda couldn't even fathom. When she asked about it, Susan was dismissive. "Oh, that? We got an incredible deal, Mom. 0% financing. And it's much safer for transporting Leo to his appointments, you know?" It seemed plausible, yet a tiny, uncomfortable seed of doubt was planted. Then came the smaller things. During a video call, Linda noticed Susan was wearing a silk blouse and a delicate gold necklace she'd never seen before. When Linda complimented it, Susan laughed it off. "This old thing? I found it at an outlet mall. A total steal." But it didn't look like a steal. It looked expensive. The stories of their financial ruin seemed to clash with the evidence of their new acquisitions. The most unsettling change, however, was their communication. In the beginning, their calls had been filled with detailed medical updates and tearful gratitude. Now, they were becoming more evasive. When Linda called to ask how Leo was feeling after a supposed treatment session, Mark would often answer, his voice hurried. "He's resting, Linda. The treatments really take a lot out of him. And us. We're exhausted from all the research, trying to find the next specialist." Sometimes, they wouldn't answer at all, only texting back hours later with a vague, "Sorry, long day at the hospital. Talk tomorrow." The details grew fuzzy. They stopped mentioning specific doctors or treatment dates. When Linda offered to come sit with Leo to give them a break, they always had an excuse. "That's so sweet, Mom, but the house needs to be kept completely sterile right now." "The doctor's orders. His immune system is too compromised." Each excuse, on its own, made sense. A grieving, stressed family would of course be exhausted and cautious. But stacked one on top of the other, they formed a wall, one that seemed designed to keep her at a distance. Linda would hang up the phone with a knot in her stomach. She'd chide herself for her suspicions. "How could you even think such things? Your daughter is going through hell. She needs your support, not your doubt." But the nagging feeling persisted, a quiet, insistent whisper in the back of her mind that something was fundamentally wrong. The image of their smiling, grateful faces was starting to blur, replaced by a picture she couldn't quite bring into focus. The weight of her unspoken anxieties grew heavier each day. To clear her head, Linda took a drive to a large, sun-drenched park a few towns over, a place where the laughter of children usually offered a welcome balm to her spirit. She settled onto a bench near the playground, clutching the small knitted blanket she had made for Leo when he was born. She watched the children on the swings, her heart aching with a fierce longing to see her own grandson among them, healthy and carefree. A few minutes later, another woman about her age sat on the other end of the bench. She had kind eyes and a warm smile. "It's a beautiful day for it, isn't it?" the woman said, gesturing toward the playground. Her name was Carol Jenkins. "Isn't it?" They fell into the easy, familiar chatter of grandmothers, sharing anecdotes about their grandchildren. Linda spoke of Leo's love for dinosaurs, and Carol talked about her granddaughter Emily's passion for painting. Eventually, the conversation drifted to more serious topics. With a heavy sigh, Linda's guard slipped. "My Leo, he's not been well," she confided, her voice catching. "He has a very rare illness, juvenile myelofibrosis." She braced herself for the usual response, a tilted head of pity, a murmured, "I'm so sorry." Instead, Carol's face lit up with an expression of pure, unadulterated recognition. "My goodness, what a coincidence!" Carol exclaimed, her voice full of energy. "My Emily, the one over there on the slide, she has the same thing, diagnosed about 6 months ago." Linda stared, stunned into silence. The odds were infinitesimal. "Really?" she managed to ask. "It's been a whirlwind, of course," Carol continued, her tone open and earnest. "But honestly, the clinical trial at the State University Hospital has been an absolute godsend, hasn't it? I don't know what we would have done without it." The world seemed to stop. The sounds of the playground, the shouting children, the squeaking swings, faded into a dull hum. The clinical trial?" Linda repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Carol nodded enthusiastically. "Oh, yes, the one Dr. Albright is running. It's a miracle. It covers every single cost. The treatments, the hospital stays, the medication, all of it. We haven't had to pay a dime. It's fully funded by a research grant. Aren't you just so thankful for it?" Linda felt the knitted blanket in her lap, its soft fibers suddenly feeling like sandpaper against her skin. Fully funded. Covers every cost. The words echoed in her mind, a deafening drumbeat of disbelief. She tried to keep her voice steady, to mask the tidal wave of horror that was rising within her. "Yes!" she choked out, the lie feeling like acid on her tongue. So thankful." She could feel Carol's warm, compassionate gaze on her, but all Linda could see was the glossy brochure for Leo's Light and the check for $85,000. She saw the new SUV, the silk blouse, and the faces of her entire church community. The beautiful day had turned menacing, and the sun felt cold on her skin. The drive home was a blur. Carol Jenkins's cheerful, innocent words, fully funded, haven't had to pay a dime, replayed in Linda's mind on a torturous loop. Each repetition chipped away at the foundation of trust she had so carefully rebuilt in her daughter. When she got home, she didn't take off her coat. She sat at her small kitchen table, her hands trembling so violently she had to clasp them together. For a moment, she tried to rationalize. Maybe Leo's case was different. Maybe he didn't qualify for that specific trial. But the hope felt thin, a fragile shield against a terrifying certainty. She had to know. With a deep, shuddering breath, she found her laptop. Her fingers fumbled on the keys as she typed State University Hospital Pediatric Oncology. She found the department's main number. Posing as the relative of a newly diagnosed child, she rehearsed her questions, her heart pounding against her ribs. She dialed the number. A friendly administrative assistant answered. "I was told you have a clinical trial for juvenile myelofibrosis," Linda said, her voice strained. "My nephew was just diagnosed, and we're exploring options." "Oh yes, doctor. Albright's study," the woman replied kindly. "It's a wonderful program. We have several children currently enrolled. It's been showing remarkable results." "Is enrollment difficult?" Linda pressed, her throat tight. "Is it expensive?" "Oh no, dear," the administrator said with a gentle laugh. "The grant covers all patient costs. The main requirement is that the patient meets the specific diagnostic criteria. Do you know the child's name? I could check to see if his physician has already sent over a referral." The moment of truth had arrived. "His name is Leo," Linda said, her voice cracking. "Leo Miller." There was a moment of silence, followed by the soft clicking of a keyboard. "Ah, yes, I see him right here," the woman said cheerfully. "Leo Miller. He was enrolled in the trial 3 months ago. He's one of Dr. Albright's star patients." The phone slipped from Linda's hand, clattering onto the table. "Our patients," the administrator's voice continued faintly, but Linda couldn't hear it. The confirmation was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. It was true, all of it. The treatments were free. While she was begging her friends and church for money, Leo was already receiving the best care, at no cost. The last piece of the puzzle slid into place with sickening ease. She opened a new browser tab and typed Leo's Light Foundation into the search bar. The first result wasn't a charity website, but a link to the state's business registry. There it was, in cold, black and white digital print. Leo's Light, LLC, a limited liability company, not a nonprofit, not a charity. The registered address was for Susan and Mark's house, the house paid for in part by her late husband's hard work. Linda stared at the screen, a hollow, aching cavern opening in her chest. It wasn't a foundation, it was a shell corporation. It wasn't about saving Leo. It was about funding a lifestyle. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it stole her breath. A cold, hard rage replaced the hollow grief in Linda's chest. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, and it propelled her out of her chair, into her car, and down the familiar route to Susan and Mark's house. She didn't call ahead. She didn't want to give them time to prepare their lies. When she pulled up, the gleaming black SUV in the driveway seemed to mock her, a monument to their deception. She rang the doorbell, her finger pressing down hard. Susan opened the door, a bright, false smile on her face that faltered when she saw her mother's expression. "Mom, what a surprise! Is everything okay?" "Let me in, Susan," Linda said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. It was a command, not a request. Startled, Susan stepped aside. Mark was in the living room, watching a massive new flat-screen television. He muted it, a flicker of apprehension on his face. Linda walked to the center of the room, the plush new rug feeling alien under her feet. She didn't sit. She turned to face them, her gaze like ice. "I went to the park today," she began, her voice dangerously quiet. "I met a woman named Carol Jenkins. Her granddaughter, Emily, has the same illness as Leo. She saw the color drain from Susan's face. Mark shifted his weight, his eyes darting toward his wife. She told me all about the wonderful clinical trial at the State University Hospital, Linda continued, her voice rising with each word. The fully funded clinical trial, the one that covers every single cost. The one Leo has been enrolled in for 3 months. Silence. The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about," Susan stammered, her hands fluttering nervously. "That's a different program. Leo's condition is more complicated." "Stop lying!" Linda's voice cracked like a whip. "I called the hospital. I searched the business registry. Leo's Light LLC. It's not a foundation, it's your personal piggy bank." The facade shattered. Mark slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. But Susan's fear morphed into a venomous rage. "Okay, fine," she shrieked, her face contorted. "So what if it is? Do you have any idea the stress we've been under? The emotional toll? We deserved something. A little compensation for all our pain and worry." Linda stared at her daughter, horrified. This was a stranger. "Compensation? You stole money from me. You stole it from our friends, from the church, from people who gave you their last $20 because they believed they were saving my grandson's life. You owed it to us," Susan screamed back, tears of fury streaming down her face. "You and Dad were always so cheap, always hoarding your money. You never helped us when we needed it. This was just you finally paying what you should have years ago." The cruelty of the words struck Linda with more force than a physical blow. Her love, her sacrifice had been twisted into an obligation. Her deepest act of generosity was being thrown back in her face as a debt collected. In that moment, the daughter she had raised, loved, and grieved for was gone. In that moment, Linda looked at the two of them, one cowering in shame, the other spitting poison, and felt nothing but a vast, empty cold. "God forgive you," she whispered, turning her back on them, "because I never will." She walked out the door and didn't look back. Linda did not go home and crumble. The pain was immense, a gaping wound in her soul, but her grandson was still at the center of this monstrous lie. Her love for him was the one pure thing left, and she would protect it, and him, with the last of her strength. The next morning, she made a series of phone calls that were the hardest of her life. The first was to Pastor Dave. The second was to Sheila, the head of her book club. The third was to her neighbor, Mr. Henderson. To each of them, she laid out the devastating truth, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. She explained the free clinical trial, the LLC, the lies. The initial shocked silence on the other end of the line was quickly replaced by a collective, simmering anger. They hadn't just been defrauded, their compassion had been weaponized against them. That week, a group of 10, led by a determined Linda, met with a reputable lawyer. They came armed with evidence: Linda's bank statements, canceled checks from other donors, the printout of the LLC registration, and a notarized statement from the hospital confirming the dates of Leo's no-cost treatment. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Miss Davies, listened intently, her expression growing grimmer with each detail. "This is not just a family dispute," she said firmly when they had finished. "This is a clear-cut case of wire fraud and theft by deception, and we are taking it to the district attorney." The wheels of justice began to turn with surprising speed. Presented with the mountain of irrefutable evidence from over a dozen victims, the DA's office launched a formal investigation. 2 weeks later, on a crisp autumn morning, 2 police cars pulled up in front of Susan and Mark's house. They were arrested in full view of the neighbors, their faces pale with shock as they were led away in handcuffs. The court proceedings were a painful ordeal, but Linda attended every session, a silent, stoic presence in the front row. Susan and Mark were found guilty on all counts. A judge, calling their actions a despicable exploitation of both a sick child and a community's goodwill, sentenced them to prison. The court froze all their assets, including the new SUV and the money in their accounts, and ordered full restitution. Miss Davies, on behalf of Linda and the other victims, successfully petitioned the court to have all recovered funds, including Linda's life savings, placed into a protected trust. It was to be managed by an impartial, court-appointed guardian, designated exclusively for Leo's genuine future needs, his education, his long-term health, anything he might require. Linda never saw her daughter again. The grief for the child she had lost was a permanent scar on her heart. But as she sat in the park one afternoon, watching Leo, truly healthy now, his illness in remission, chase a butterfly across the grass, she felt a grim, quiet peace. She had lost her daughter, her money, and her innocence. But she had saved her grandson. She had ensured that the light in his life, the real light, would never be extinguished by his parents' darkness. Justice had been served.